Good morning. If you are in children's church, you're going to be dismissed to your classes at this time, so you guys want to head that way. I'd rather be able to pray than to be a great preacher. Jesus never taught his disciples how to preach, but only how to pray. Those words aren't my own. Actually, this quote is ascribed to Dwight L. Moody, the famous evangelist, founder of Moody Bible Institute. But I find myself agreeing with the sentiment. I will never be an adequate preacher if I'm not first a prayer. But prayer can be a humbling subject. This morning, if I replaced my good mornings with you to, how was your prayer life this week? Or, so how often did you pray this week? If that was my greeting, questions like that a lot of times cause us to kind of avert our eyes or cringe a little bit. Because while all of us would agree the importance of prayer, probably most people in this room would agree that there's power in prayer, that God answers prayer, but most of us in this room would probably say our prayer life isn't where we want it to be. So why is that? If we believe in it, why is it so hard to practice? I think one reason we struggle with prayer is it goes against our nature. Prayer is a submissive act, and we aren't very good at submitting. We don't like to ask for help. Ever since we were very little, we've been taking these strides towards self-reliance and independence. We learned to stand for the first time. We learned to walk. We learned to feed ourselves, and we learned to dress ourselves. And all those things are celebrated and applauded, and mom stands back and videotapes it and calls grandma and grandpa, and as they should be celebrated. But all these steps all of our lives we've worked towards not needing anybody's help. Baby steps and baby steps towards learning to not need anybody's help. But what is prayer? Admitting that we need somebody's help. So I think that's one of the reasons we struggle with prayer is it goes against our nature. We've been taught for so long to take care of yourself and to not. And a lot of times we wait till we get in a desperate need. We've exhausted all of our own resources. We've tried everything we know how to do, and then we ask somebody for help. And we treat God the same way. We do everything we can in our own power. When life gets bad enough, then we go to God for help. When disasters hit, hurricanes and floods, these natural disasters that are out of our control, or job loss, terminal illness, marital strife, when those things hit, people need help. People need answers. So what's needed today is a return to the basics of prayer. And we are going to look a little bit at prayer this morning. And we're going to look at Jesus and see some principles from his life that we can learn from. Because just as a river is purest at its source, if you want to get the purest water, you go to the source of it. And so to get to the purest form of prayer, we're going to go to the source of our life. In Hebrews it says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, so that we will not grow weary and lose heart. So Jesus is the author and perfecter, and where better to learn about prayer than through Jesus? So today we're going to look at a small account in Mark's Gospel. So if you want to turn to Mark, we're going to be in Mark chapter 35. Mark chapter 1, verse 35. As you're finding 135, I just want to tell you a little bit of this happened. Jesus has began his ministry. He's called his disciples. And as Mark kind of skips the birth narrative of Jesus, and he goes straight into to his ministry. And he's called his disciples. He's teaching. He's healing. He's doing all this preaching. These crowds are gathering to hear him. And it's in the middle of all this that this takes place. Verse 35 says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. So the first thing we're going to see about Jesus is Jesus' prayer life was intentional. It was intentional. There's a big difference between an accident and an incident. An accident is something that happens without planning, or it happens because of unforeseen circumstances. A child reaches for something and accidentally spills the glass of milk, and they didn't see it coming. A teenager reaches for his phone and accidentally goes through the traffic light. Didn't see it coming. We forget to enter the ATM withdrawal and the check registry, and so the check bounces and the bank, it doesn't clear. Accidents simply happen. We don't plan them, they're not premeditated. We're just going through life, and because of not seeing something or because of not being careful enough, all of a sudden an accident happens. But incidents take planning. An incident is something that is calculated and it is done intentionally. Well, too many of us have an accidental prayer life. We wait for the crisis to happen, and then we pray hoping for some kind of relief from the careless actions, from the unforeseen circumstances. And when we stumble upon something that needs prayer, that's when we find ourselves praying. But Jesus was intentional in his prayer life. He didn't wait for things to go wrong and pray. He prayed intentionally. So we're going to look at how to do that today. Mark goes into detail to describe in this short little passage Jesus' practices of prayer. And the first thing it says, very early in the morning. So the first thing we can learn is from Jesus is that he set apart a time to pray. The first thing we see is Jesus set aside a time to pray very early in the morning. The Jewish people, they measured time based on the watches of the Roman soldiers at night. So from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Was the first watch. From 9 to midnight was the second watch. From 12 to 3 a.m. was the third watch. And 3 to 6 was the fourth watch. 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. And it was during this watch where Jesus gets up early in the morning. Why so early? Jesus understood the value of finding a time where he would be free from the distractions, the demands of the crowd. I mean, his ministry was picking up speed rapidly, and his days were demanding, so he had to find a time free from distraction, free from demands. So he rose early to make it a priority to spend his time in prayer. Once the day starts, it's easy to get caught up in the demands of the day. I've even noticed this in my own life, even on a day off. A day off, you've got the whole day ahead of you, no work responsibilities. But it's so easy how even on your day off, you can get caught up in all the things that you have to do or that you want to get done. And those, even on your days off, those distractions come flooding in. If you don't set aside time to pray, it often doesn't happen. But Jesus understood this. He goes off early in the morning. And it's not necessarily about waking up early in the morning. Not all of us are morning people. I think everyone should at least experiment with early morning prayer because there is something special about starting your day off, the very first thing you do, getting on your knees, giving that day to God, committing it to God. So I think that's something we should all try and not just write off, but some of us aren't morning people. But the main point is giving God the rights to your schedule and saying, God, I trust you. If I give you this time, all the other stuff, you're going to allow me to get done, or it doesn't need done. So giving God the rights to your schedule and to your calendar and your day planner and making sure that time is in there and finding a time that's free from distractions. And distractions brings us to the second thing, is Jesus also set apart a place to pray. So he set apart a time and he set apart a place. It says he went up to a solitary place, a deserted place. Again, to avoid the distractions, to close out the distractions in life. Don't know if you've ever tried to, have a conversation with somebody when the TV is blaring, or, are in the middle of a crowded room. We have in our last school, they installed this new sound system at a football game, and I don't think it came in quick with a volume button, or they haven't found it yet. And it was so loud that you couldn't even talk to the person next to you. At a football game, I know it's not a quiet atmosphere. Didn't expect it to be a library. But this new sound system was so loud, and the music and the announcer was so loud, you couldn't even have a conversation with the person next to you. And sometimes life is like that. There's all these distractions, and there's all these things shouting for our attention. And it's hard to have a conversation with God. It's hard to really communicate with Him. I mean, Jesus had to avoid distractions from the public, from the crowds that were following Him. But we bring those distractions with us. We don't have to be in public. You know, we have our phones and we have our devices, and people can get to us and distract us. It's right at our fingertips. If we're not setting aside a time and a place to stop the distractions, to turn it off, and to communicate with God. I read a story about early African converts to Christianity in Africa long ago. And they were serious about their private devotions, and they'd have a separate spot out in the thicket where they would go to pray and just to meditate and to spend time with God. They each have kind of their own little area out in the wilderness, and as they would go to that same spot every time to pray, they would wear a path between the village and their spot. And like everybody kind of knew where everybody's spot was. And the result of that was, if one of those people would start to neglect prayer, if they got busy, if they got distracted, if they started not taking that time with God, then it would become apparent to everybody else, because the path would start to get overgrown again and would start to fade away. And it was the saying to say, brother, the grass grows on your path. Meaning that you've been neglecting going to your place of prayer. Now we don't always have that kind of accountability built into our lives, because we've made prayer a private thing, and it should be. Jesus says to when you pray, go in, shut the door. It's not about making a big show and everybody seeing that you're praying. Go in and pray to God in private. And we've made that kind of a private part of our lives. But sometimes we've also lost that accountability, where we can say to somebody that the grass grows over your path. When's the last time you spent time with the Lord? Last thing about having a place to pray is, if you live with a family, is that the family would know that a certain time of day and a certain place is your place. Maybe we can keep each other accountable that way. So Jesus, He set aside a time and a place. That's how He was intentional about His prayer life. He made it doesn't just happen by accident. You don't just stumble into time with God. We have to plan out. The last principle we see from Mark is that Jesus' prayer life gave Him clarity. We're going to read on. So what happened when Jesus is out praying, and this is in verse 36, Simon and his companions went to look for Him. And when they found Him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." I think that's kind of funny. I think I might be exaggerating a little bit. So the disciples are looking for Jesus, and when they find Him, they're like, "Everyone is looking for you." And I don't see that in this verse anywhere. So I don't know if, it's early in the morning still. I'm not sure that everyone is looking for Jesus. But they're upset that He didn't give them permission to and I don't know what they were worried about. They thought He was going off to leave them. If they were afraid they were going to face the crowds without Him. I don't know what their intentions were. But I just think it's funny that they are a little over dramatic. And everyone is looking for you. And Jesus replies to them, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." It's interesting this morning, we've already talked so much about purpose. And that's really where this next point is Jesus' prayer life made Him clear about His purpose. The disciples were worried about here. They were there in this town. There were crowds around waiting to hear back from Jesus. He'd been preaching all night the night before. Jesus says it's time to go somewhere else. And they're worried about meeting those needs and those people. The disciples are worried about the urgent, the things that are right around. And Jesus, through His prayer life, realized it was time to go somewhere else. And there was other people that needed to hear from Him. There was other people that He needed to minister to. the disciples, it was about being with the people, but to Jesus, it was about being with the Father first. The Father set the mission. The Father set the purpose, not the disciples, not the crowds. When you spend time with the Father, you have clarity on what is important and what is urgent. Because the urgent, we know from life, the urgent is not always the most important, and the most important things often aren't urgent. So if we're not intentional about the important, sometimes they get crowded out by the urgent. And it's important. Nothing is more important than our time with the Father. Jesus knew this. So taking time for intentional prayer can help us determine the important from the urgent, and to have clarity on what God is calling us to do. And this isn't just on a personal level as a church. Zoah needs to be a praying church because we can't meet all the needs of all the people in the entire community. What is our purpose? We need clarity about what people is Zoah called to reach? What ministries is Zoah called to be a part of? We need clarity for that, and we'll get that through our time with the Father. Dr. Curtis Hudson said, "There is more that you can do after you pray, but there is nothing you can do until you pray." So prayer is the place where our actions should start. Then after we pray, we seek our purpose. For the next few weeks, we're going to be diving deeper into a few elements of prayer. This is kind of our launching point, and nothing earth-shattering here, I don't think. Setting aside a time to pray, so the day doesn't get by you and you haven't spent time with the Lord. Finding a place free from distractions. To pray and allowing God to give you clarity and to give you purpose. It's nothing earth-shattering. But the series we're entering into is going to be called Intentional Prayer, or IP for short. And your computer has an IP address, and it identifies its connection with the internet. And so prayer is our connection to the Creator. So in these next few weeks, we're going to be looking at that connection to the Creator through our intentional prayer. So to close, instead of talking more about prayer, I want us to spend some time in prayer. So I'm going to ask you to bow your heads and let's spend a few moments in prayer. If you want to bow your heads, if you want to kneel, whatever you want to do. I just want us to spend a few moments in prayer, and it can be quiet, silently. If you feel led to pray out loud, please feel free to do that. I'm going to give us a few moments to do that. Not the polite, few moments, but seriously, a few moments. I want you praying, not wondering when I'm going to pray, but I want you praying. Silently, if you feel like praying out loud, go for it. And I'm going to, when I close us in prayer, I'll invite the praise team to come up and lead us in a song. So let's pray together. I thank you for this church. Thank you for loving us and allowing us to have that relationship with you. I pray for each one here that we would just be drawn to you in prayer intentionally on purpose. That our prayers would not be an accident, but an incident, but something we intend and follow through. We'd be a praying church. We can't do anything outside of your will, and the way to get inside of your will is to pray and to pray. Bring us to our knees, Lord, so that we can rely on you. We need your help. We need your guidance. We need your clarity. We need your provision. We need you every day. We need you every day. Your son's name I pray. Amen. I ask you to keep your heads bowed and eyes closed for a minute. Don't know what your prayer life looks like. It could be spending 2 hours every morning before the sun comes up, and I wouldn't know. It could be non-existent. It could be a roller coaster of good days and bad days. So my next question is, it applies to everybody. It doesn't matter where you are at in that spectrum, so there's no judgment here. But what I want is a commitment that who here is willing to add 10 minutes a day to wherever you're at. So there's no judgment, because I don't know where you're at. So you could be adding 10 minutes to an hour. You could be adding 10 minutes to 0. I wouldn't know. But it's a commitment to you and God. If you're willing to add 10 minutes of time with Him to your current normal, would you stand up? I'm excited with what God can do with that. Would you all stand and as we sing?